this place isn't going to change for you. It's not going to bend to your will because somehow you want it to. And I think that Americans, when they come here, they struggle with that.
This is Jeff Goldberg, a New Yorker who's been in India for 15 years. He writes movie scripts, directs films, and runs his own acting studio. Jeff explained why it's hard for Americans to understand India, whether living in India has become more expensive lately, and why sharing a cup of chai from a street chaiwala is the best way to make friends with Indians. I'm Max Chernov, let's go! What do you think the hardest thing for a foreigner, for a Westerner, especially maybe for American, to understand about India?
I'm glad you framed it with the American thing, because I wouldn't say that Europeans are quite as stuck this way. But Americans, yeah, there is a bit of a thing that I've noticed with them is, in America, we grew up with this, like, everybody in the world wants to be America. Everybody in the world wants to come to America. America, the greatest. America, the shining mountain on top of a hill, right? And I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but that's how we grow up, right? That's part of the education system. That's the way it's presented to us that, like, the American Revolution was an experiment in democracy. And this experiment is this special place that's been going on ever since, the 18th century. Even the French writer Alexandre de Tocqueville spoke about it, And yeah, that's there. That's true in the mindset. So people, when they come out into the world from the United States, and this isn't just true of India, it's true everywhere with Americans, they think the world wants to do everything the American way. And what they don't realize is that local people are very comfortable doing it their local way. Like, they're very okay with it, They're not sitting in Mumbai or Chennai or in Singapore or, in Ho Chi Minh City thinking to themselves, gosh, I wish we were doing it the American way. I don't think anybody's thinking that. I think that people are very comfortable with their local way of doing things, and they're not upset about it at all. I think they're very happy. And I think that Americans, when they come here, they struggle with that. Like, why isn't it being done this way? And why isn't it being handled that way? And it's like, guys, you're not at home. And people here are very comfortable with their way of doing things, their way of transacting business, their way of living, and their way of life is essential to their being. You don't get to, like, change that just because you think it should be this way, right? That's something I think Americans really, really struggle with. Europeans, I think, are a little bit better with that because, obviously Europe, you cross borders much more readily. You're familiar with, it's a much more cosmopolitan place. You're more familiar with other nationalities and ways of life. Where in the United States, it's a little bit more homogeneous and it's a little bit more monolithic.
Are there cases when, let's say, Americans come to India, spend there like 1 or 2 years, and then they just, I cannot do it anymore, so I go back?
Absolutely. I don't want to talk about Mumbai or India at large because they're such gigantically different things in so many ways. But based on my experience, yeah, I mean, one can hit a threshold here, one can hit a wall here and just be like, I can't anymore, because it is different, and every day you wake up and that difference doesn't go away, and the logic is other, and the way that things function is other. And at some point, I guess, as maybe you get older, or maybe as your family composition changes, you add kids, or you add a wife or a husband, maybe you want things that are a bit more familiar, a bit more comfortable. And that makes sense because this place isn't going to change for you. It's not going to bend to your will because somehow you want it to. And another thing I think that Americans struggle with is being immigrant. I'm an immigrant in India. I recognize that. I don't have a family backing. I don't have a family apartment. I don't have help. That network of people that you have in your local spot. And that's a very different way to live. And Americans aren't used to being immigrants. And that's evidenced by just even the way they're treating their own immigrants right now. Like, it's just awful how unhospitable people seem to be. I'm not saying that there is or is not a problem with the immigration issues in the United States. I'm sure there'll be lots of comments about this now. But to be honest with you, I don't know enough about it to weigh in on like what the issue is with the border or the immigration thing. But what I'll just say this is like, look, man, people are people, and we all come from somewhere. And ultimately, I think most people are trying to do good by themselves, by their kids, by their families, and want to live peacefully. And I think that's pretty reasonable. Of course, there's always going to be hiccups, and of course, there's always going to be things that go wrong. But come on now, like we're all trying to achieve something. It's not with malice in our heart. I don't think, at least I hope not.
I think what's one common thing that Americans and Indians have, it's the sense of patriotism.
Indians right now feel very good, and that's good. They should. They are developing their country at breakneck speed, and I wish that we were digging up every road all at once. But, I mean, the country is developing, money is coming in, education is happening in a lot of different ways, a lot of different places and spaces. It'd be nice to see it reach everybody in a more uniform and equal way, but that's not for us to figure out right now. However, Indians are extremely patriotic, and why not? And, you look at the things that they're putting out in the world today, the ISRO, the Indian Space Agency, is putting up rockets and pulling off amazing feats that Western scientists are incapable of doing, or are doing it in a much more expensive way. That's amazing. That's really impressive. India is exporting so many goods and services to the world today. And on top of which, Indians are a very educated group of people who are industrious and hardworking. And there's no country in the world today that hasn't benefited from the diaspora of folks who have traveled and are living abroad, say in Singapore, the United States, France, the UK, Germany. So I think India has a lot to be proud of. And this is definitely her moment on the world stage. So let's all watch her take a bow.
What are the changes that you see around you?
Everything, man. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have construction banging away right now. What I mean is like literally they're like digging up the whole city. All of a sudden at once, they're building a sea-facing road. They're digging tunnels. They're extending the sea links. They're building a metro. They've just built a brand new, beautiful, huge bridge that goes off the eastern side of the peninsula towards the mainland of India. It's a really interesting time to be here, but the challenge is, it does feel like we're living on a construction site. And we spoke a little bit about my time in New York and Paris last time. I'm an artist, and I always knew that I'd have like a bohemian life, going from one place to the next. And I always sort of expected that, like, as a good friend of mine used to say, what we artists don't make in money, we make up in cool, right? So wherever we go, it's cheap, but we're cool, right? We bring the cool to the cheap, right? Interestingly, what I'm seeing happen is like the expensive is starting to take over and the cool is starting to like be pushed out again. And it's kind of tough. And a lot of artists looking around are kind of like shrugging their shoulders and they're like, where do we go? We can't afford this anymore. And that's another big change since actually even we met, is the city has just become really expensive, like actually expensive. I haven't lived in America for over 20 plus years, but like every once in a while when I hear a price in my head and I know it's a lot for something, I'll actually like quickly translate it back into dollars and I'll be like, wow, that's a lot of money. Like, that's a lot of money for that. Like, in New York, that's like a New York price for something like that. And that's confusing because, we don't have the same social safety nets here. And you have a lot of people who live on much, much less in terms of salary, in terms of means. And it's kind of confusing. It's like, if those of us in privileged Bandra are struggling, how's the rest of the country keeping up? Because it feels like it's a pinch right now. So that's what I would say.
Actually, I think it's a global change. We can definitely feel it in Singapore. It seems like people around the world, they're like, I keep hearing from my friends, London is so expensive now, or like Dublin, Ireland is so expensive now. And people think it's only their place, but I think their reality is like the whole world is getting like more expensive because of the wars, because of the conflicts. So that's kind of the notion currently, I think.
I guess, I don't know, it's weird because it's like somebody in my office keeps pointing this out. She keeps saying it like exasperated, Indians look at two things that are kind of interesting. They're kind of fun, where in New York, Westerners will look at like, the New York Stock Exchange or the CAC 40 in France or the FTSE in London, they'll look at the market. Here in India, people look at the market. They look at the Sensex, make sure it's going up. But they also look at gold prices. Gold prices are a big thing in India. People love to look at the gold price. And Usually when the market's going up, the gold price is either level or going down, right? Because it means that like, one is doing well, the other one can kind of chill. When there's insecurity, gold goes up, right? Every day, she keeps looking at both prices and she throws her shoulders up, her hands up, and she's just like, how is gold and the market going up at the same time, And it just sort of defies logic at the moment. But then again, I think we live in a very different paradigm than even we did pre the pandemic. It's actually really interesting. I was sitting around yesterday. Sunday's my real day where I get to kind of just not do much. So I was sitting around in my new apartment, which is actually a beautiful old house in Bandra. We have a little apartment inside it, and it's really nice to live in like one of these old kind of houses, or what we call bungalows here. And I was sitting around in this beautiful place built back in 1951, thinking to myself, wow, I feel like I've just woken up into a new paradigm, a whole new idea, a whole new different world. Like I feel like I've been sleeping, because everything just feels so different all of a sudden, so quickly. And I don't even think it's just money. I think it's everything. I think everything is just moving so quickly now that we're all running after it.
How's your social circle looks like? That's the first one. And second one, what would be your advice for someone new to India, how to make friends with Indians? What's the, let's say, how to make these friendships, like physically, where to go, how to do it, maybe what to talk with people?
I have a few expat friends, but that's not actually what I'm about. Like, most of my friends are Indian. Most of my people are local. That's just kind of how I've always kept it. And it wasn't really by design. It was more or less by accident. But sure, I mean, there are like one or two guys who are from the States or from Europe, from France, where I lived, that I'm buddies with. And, it's just nice to speak French, or it's nice to talk about, baseball and feel close to home. Yeah, I mean, I live in India, and I mean, when you live in a place, you want to be in that place, and integrating yourself to people and with the local community is very important. And as for how would I recommend tip to get to know the Indians, like anywhere else in the world, break bread with them, man, eat food, go have some dinner, go have some lunch. If you get invited over to your Indian colleague's house for dinner, go. If you get invited out for drinks with your buddies after work, go. Indians are incredibly hospitable when it comes to breaking bread and sharing food. And, here, it's actually very funny. When I go back to the States now, everybody orders a plate of food, and you get your plate of food, and you eat your plate of food, right? And I'm always the first one who cuts my food, and I'm like, does anyone want a bite? And everyone's like, what? And I'm like, oh, aren't we supposed to share? And that's a very communal thing here, where like, you put the food out, and like some people in their homes will have a table that turns, so everyone can kind of pick at the food and stuff. And I think that like, sharing a meal with someone is always the best way to get to know them. And also what's great is that Indians they love their cuisine so much. And when I say Indian cuisine, that is such a misleading term, because cuisine changes from place to place here. I mean, literally from place to place to place. And when I say place to place, I don't mean just city to city. I'm talking from neighborhood to neighborhood. You'll find different food. From region to region, the foods are just completely different. The spices, the way they're cooked, the way they're prepared. When you go out with a local and they bring you to like their favorite place, you're going to taste stuff that you've never tasted before. And that's the other thing, is like, don't go to like, the standard local travel guide places, because those places, yeah, they're cool. They'll be a little bit pricey and you might feel a little bit more comfortable. But if you really want to like taste Indian food and you really want to eat local, go to like these tiny little, like up in North India, we call them dabas. Down in South India, you'll find places that will serve like more South Indian food, like dosas and idlis and uttapams and things like that. Just go and just eat and enjoy yourself. That's my suggestion. Break bread. I think that's the best way in the world to get to know anyone anywhere. Even in Italy or France or in the United States, just sit down and have a meal.
Yeah, no, 100%. The sharing culture is also super common in Singapore. So basically people share, they go to like a food court, hawker center, we call it here, and people just share. That's kind of the first option that you're gonna do. You can order to yourself like some separate meal, but you're kind of supposed to, in most of the case, supposed to share. What about drinking? You're supposed to drink a lot with Indians?
I don't know if you're supposed to drink a lot. I think you should drink. I mean, I don't drink anymore, so I wouldn't recommend if you want to go out to, especially like you want to Bangalore, man. Bangalore is where the pubs are. It's where you go out for a drink and have a beer. But I mean, here in Mumbai we have clubs and pubs and things like that as well, and that's true in Chennai and Delhi and everywhere in between. I mean, I don't think you have to overdrink. I mean, binge drinking is not necessarily something that's as widely common here as it is, say, like in the UK or France and the United States. But yeah, I mean, going out for a beer with people is always a great way to get to know them. And also what I would say is, like, actually my favorite thing to do is to get a cup of chai, sit down and have a cup of tea with people in the afternoon. That's a really, really lovely way to just kind of spend some time. And the best chai is always the chaiwala on the street whose chai will cost you anywhere between 5 and 10 rupees. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that this studio is so beloved by all of us is the best chai in Bandra is right downstairs. My buddy Rahim makes it, and stuff's amazing. I mean, it's very sugary, so you have to want that, but it's really good. It's just so good, actually.
What's the no topics that you're not supposed to talk about with Indians?
They're kind of tired of being spoken to rather than with. They often feel like the world speaks to them and not with them. And when the world speaks to them, it also speaks to them about them. And so many of those opinions are really, 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 really preformed. I hate to use the word prejudicial and bigoted, but some of them are. The best thing that a person can do is just listen and absorb. And like you do, man, I think you ask great questions, and I think that's why you do so well with your videos, is because you listen. And I think that the no topics, of course, like anywhere in the world, it depends upon whom you're speaking to, and of course, what that person's belief system is.
What would be appropriate in the US if you chat with someone, not close friend, but someone you know? What would be appropriate in the US, but not really appropriate in India?
Intimate matters. Americans tend to be okay pretty quickly speaking about intimate matters, albeit them, emotionally intimate or physically intimate matters. That might come up a little bit more easily in the West or in the US, certainly in Western Europe, maybe a little bit more, where in India, intimate matters are not something that really come up all that often. It takes a bit of time to sort of develop that kind of friendship and that kind of trust. So I wouldn't say it's a no. I would just say it's a question of proximity and permission. And I think that, but one of the other things, like, I'll actually flip your question around. There's one thing that I love about India that you don't talk about in the West, which is like your family. Like family comes up all the time. There's nobody that I've worked with or even like known that doesn't know about my family. It doesn't know about my girlfriend, doesn't know about my son, doesn't know about my studio, doesn't know about my dogs. Everybody's really connected that way, right? And in the States or the West, we're a little bit less open about those things. I'm not sure why, but just we're here. Everything is so absolutely fused together that like your family is such a big part of who you are, professionally, personally, socially, etc., that like it's there, it's present. And I think that I really like. For me, like when I'm not at work, I'm at home, like cuddling my dogs or hanging out with my girlfriend or hanging with my son, playing drums with him or playing video games or just watching like a movie or something. So yeah, like for me, it's all about family.
Hollywood and the whole like film industry in the US like dominated the world in the 80s, maybe after the Second World War, I think, for like 30-40 years. That was one of the main suppliers of, let's say, cinema and art of cinema to the world. India, as I understand, India cinematography and cinema, it's more oriented inside of the country, maybe a bit less outside. What do you think the future of Bollywood, and not only Bollywood, but the whole cinema film industry in India, like let's say for the next 10 years?
India, yes, the film industry has always been a bit more insular, a bit more local, playing to either the very, very local audiences, albeit regional cinemas, meaning like the Telugu cinema in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, or, the Kannada cinema industry, which is in Bangalore, or the Malayalam film industry, which is in Kerala, which, by the way, is brilliant. They make brilliant films. And for anybody watching this, please look up the films that are made in Malayalam, because they're making some great stuff. But then, of course, there's also the Marathi industry. But the one that the world knows as Bollywood, that's the Hindi film industry. And the Hindi film industry is centered here in Mumbai, but it makes films for the entire Hindi-speaking belt, which is more or less North India. And it has a pretty huge remit because it's appealing and catering to a lot of different states and different expectations and different tastes. So it's a complicated thing. But, you know, I think that filmmakers here are making films for their audience, which makes sense, right? And let's be clear, you know, they're speaking their language, and not just their language of cinema, but also the language of Hindi or the local regional languages as well. And they don't feel any compulsion to make films in English or on a global scale. That doesn't mean they don't make globally critically brilliant films. Let's be very clear here. I just think that, like, you know, they're very comfortable with making things in their local languages, and they should. And I think that's a wonderful thing to celebrate. And it's a very necessary thing. And thank goodness they do that, because we would lose those languages, like we've seen so many other languages in the world, a little bit diminished by English, because it's just so everywhere, right? American English, that is. As where, in terms of the next 10 years of the industry, right now we're going through a major flux. There's a major change going on. Since the streaming platforms, we call them OTTs here, since the streaming platforms, Netflix, Amazon, and a lot of local players have come online, it's really changed the business model for a lot of the studios, the local producers, the bigger producers, the small-time producers. Everything has really, really changed. Not to mention box office receipts have kind of done this. They're moving around, because some films do really well and some films do really poorly. And it's kind of hard to know what's going to do well, because, you know, you have films like Barbie, which did really well in the summer, which is an American film. Then you have a film like Animal, which is a local film that does really well in the fall. And they're really actually quite different movies in terms of like theme, in terms of story. One is a bit more, well, one is very female-centric, the other is very male-centric. I'm sure you'll get comments about the fact that I mentioned that film Animal. And I'm sure they'll be very colorful, because there's a lot of divided opinion on that one. But I think ultimately, you know, look, I often say this to my acting and my film students. In this industry, it's really easy to get confused by all the different prevailing winds and changing winds and ideas and media, and it's hard to even believe half of it. And Instagram tells you one thing and the paper tells you another thing. And your head is spinning by the end of the day. A good buddy of mine back in New York once said something to me that's kind of stayed with me. He actually said this to me in Paris, but he's from New York like me. He said to me, he said, you know, Jeff, making a film isn't that hard. You write a good script, you find the money, you direct a good script, and you make a good movie. And I wish it was that easy all the time, but that's kind of what it is, right? And I think that in India, we're kind of set up in the next 10 years to do that. And let me explain. We have an absolute, and I've used this term the last time, ocean of amazing storytellers, cinematographers, actors, directors. And I think that sky is the limit. And I think that, you know, if anyone who's watching this, I can't stress this enough. If you really want to take a look at some of the greatest cinema coming out of India today, look at the regional stuff, look at the Telugu stuff, look at the Tamil cinema, at the Malayalam cinema, you know, look at Bengali cinema. There's just such amazing stuff happening in Marathi, all the local languages. And of course, Hindi. Hindi's making good stuff too, no doubt. But I think that people, when they hear Indian cinema, they think of Bollywood, and Indian cinema is so much more than just Bollywood. It is so diverse. As a filmmaker and as an artist, I think that's really exciting, because you always want to be in a place where a lot is happening, right? A lot of different voices are in the room contributing to the expansion of the art. I think sky's the limit, and I think the world's paying attention.
For someone who is not really into Indian cinema, only heard about Bollywood, what would be your, sorry for the lame question, but what would be your 3 movies to start exploring India cinematography?
I'll start with 3 very, very different films. two of which I think you could probably even find on YouTube, and then one of which you probably have to find on one of your streaming platforms, OTT channels. The first one, just to acquaint yourself with India and Indian cinema, this is not a Bollywood film. It's not a commercial film. It's actually a very old film from the 1960s, but Satyajit Ray, who is obviously one of India's greatest filmmakers, cineasts, and real auteurs, Satyajit Ray's film Jalsagar, it's called Music Room in English. What a movie. I mean, I just love that film. It's about an incredibly interesting time in India as we see the Maharajas being sort of pushed out by the new commercial people that are arriving in the Republic of India. It's a very interesting film set in the 1950s on a Maharaja's plantation and palace. And it's a wonderful movie, and it's one of my all-time favorites. And that's a personal one. It's a bit artsy, but I'm a bit artsy, so, you know, I'm going to give you something that I like. But I'd say start with Jalsagar because that's going to kind of like really give you a flavor of India. I don't know if it's going to give you a flavor of like popular Indian cinema today, but nonetheless, that's a good place to start. Another great film to look at would be, and this is one I always go to, and this one I know is online on YouTube for free because I always send a link to people, is Shakti. It's a film from 1981 starring the great Amitabh Bachchan. And it's just a wonderful story. Amitabh is in his prime. He's India's most famous actor, or among India's most famous actors, because I know a lot of people would disagree with that statement. Rajinikanth and others in different parts of the country, and justifiably are themselves huge stars. But Amitabh in the world of Hindi is kind of, you know, he's the older statesman, and deservedly so. And Shakti, what a movie from 1981. I love that film. And then another film, just to go to regional cinema, you got to take a look at a film, this wonderful film from about, I don't know, maybe it's 10 years ago already, 10 years ago. It's a Malayalam film called Angamalai Diaries. Angamalai Diaries is this film where do not watch it if you're hungry because, you know, they're cooking and eating throughout the whole movie and you're just going to get starving as you watch it. But it's this very, 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 just great guerrilla, offbeat, filmmaking, fun romp through this world that like you didn't even know existed. Yeah, so the Angamalai Diaries, and that's more modern, but I love that film. And then as you sort of like get deeper and deeper into Bollywood, you know, then you can start getting into the really, really commercial stuff. And there's a lot of really good commercial stuff to look at. And it's also very genre specific. Another film I have to throw a shout out to would be a film called Company. If you like gangster pictures, and I know a lot of people are into gangster pictures, Company, that's from the early thousands. It's a great movie. Love that film. It's with Vivek Oberoi and Ajay Devgan, and it's just a great film.
For our audience from Mumbai, maybe you can like briefly explain what they can come for to your studio. So you have some performances, right? That's the one. And then if they want some classes, like acting classes, they also can come?
Here at our studio, you can expect, you know, a world-class education in the craft of acting and filmmaking. If you're interested to know more about what we're doing, please feel free to look up the Jeff Goldberg Studio. We're on Instagram. We're on, of course, we have a website. You can write to me personally. I think my email address is there somewhere. The reason I came to Mumbai to set up this studio was because I thought there was an opportunity to really work with some interesting people and create something unique. And in the 10 years that I've been at it with the studio, I haven't been let down at all. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful ride. And I look forward to meeting and hearing from all of you folks out there in the internet and, you know, starting a dialogue. And also, actually, one thing, I guess we're kind of coming to the close of today's chat, I want to say is like, you know, because I really did read all the comments. I was a bit obsessed for a minute there before bed every night. I was kind of going through them. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. Like, honestly, guys, like really moving and really cool that like people took out time to write and think positively. There were a couple negative ones, which that's cool too. Yeah, man, you know, nothing's going to be perfect. But I loved the fact that people took out time to have a conversation. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that I said to everyone today that like, I heard you.
Let me show you some magic. If you click on this video, I will disappear and reappear again. Let's try it. 3, 2, 1.